Hello, everybody, and welcome to Karma Insights. I'm your host, Krishan Patel, and today we are going to be speaking about rapport with my colleague, Marc Nielsen. So let's jump in right away here. We wanted to talk about rapport because oftentimes we feel, whether it is in our engagements or whether it is viewing how an organization works together, this idea of rapport is critical for anything to get done. And so today we're going to talk about, what is rapport? We're going to get into some examples, and we're also going to get into uh, something that we've dubbed the life cycle of rapport. So first, Marc, why don't you help us understand what is rapport?
So rapport is very simple, Christian. It's a close or harmonious relationship that hinges on the trust between its component parts. So that's going to be your clients, your colleagues, managers, partners. It's really a critical skill that should become a habit because it consistently yields measurable results in any business environment. So it's very important.
Sure, sure. I think that when I think about that definition, I I think of it as, not to use automobile, but it's like the grease that makes the gears turn with an organization. Because if if two teams have rapport and then a third team doesn't have rapport with those two teams, it can create a lot of conflict where things are not getting done. Right. And I think that you see this throughout organizations everywhere where you don't realize it, but they don't know how to build rapport with one another to get things done, not only in the short term, but in the medium and long term. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? Let's get into this idea of what is the value of creating and building rapport within an organization.
Absolutely. Well, to kind of work within that example is it's very similar to having that oil or greasing the gears to make them work in any kind of given machine or system. You can have all of the component parts put together perfectly and designed perfectly, but if it doesn't have that that greasing the gears, that rapport builds, everything won't be able to function. And so within a organization or a business environment of any kind, maybe even when you're working on a process of like digital transformation, um, it's something that you need to be flexing and using all the time. And so what it does is, because we talked about a harmonious relationship, right? It's being able to communicate effectively. It's being able to be prepared for feedback, being able to plan effectively, being able to get things done. All of these things are built upon rapport. And so an organization like you brought up, like a machine, really can't function without that that greasing of the wheels that rapport does for any kind of organization.
100% there, Mark. I I think that also this idea, piggybacking on what you said there, you know, we often look at a business or digital transformation, and I think that the idea of the transformation seems like that's like the end state journey, right? That's like getting to the peak of the mountain. So where does rapport fit within supporting an organization in business and digital transformations? And that has been a question that we have often discussed. And from my perspective, if an organization gets to its end state of its digital transformation or its business transformation, but does not do so in a way where folks are working together and learning to work better together, then it will actually just make things go worse in the long run because they will have lost long term trust and effectiveness as an organization. Like, the journey is a part of the destination, right? You don't want to just do a transformation and get it done and say, all right, we've implemented that change. Now we're done. No, you want everyone to be able to work better in the future context, right? And so I think that as whether it's whether it's us coming into a client and supporting in a transformation, or whether it's someone working within an organization in a transformation, it is important to keep rapport in mind because that really creates the long-term capability for an organization.
Absolutely. I think going along with what you said, Christian, is that this is something that it's an organic process, right? And we talked about how this can like lubricate the gears as we get moving on in solving problems or reaching the peak of what a given task is. But like we all know in the business environment, is that there are so many other avenues that will spring from accomplishing something together, whether it's developing business opportunities, whether it's forging connections with other people that can assist you, whether it's increasing the rapport with somebody who will be able to work with you on a future project. These are all things that will have long-term benefits that if we forget rapport, if we don't focus on making sure that we're continually bettering our rapport with those that we work with, we're really limiting our opportunities. And so I think that's a really important thing to always keep in mind, like you said.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Mark, why don't you share an example from your experience in management consulting that might be helpful for everyone?
Absolutely. So the first thing that comes to mind is I was working on a difficult project that had kind of been passed through several different hands. So as a consultant, we had various consultants that had worked on this same project, and but the client had remained the same. And so we were exchanging, this person had to exchange the project between other stakeholders within his own network. And that became really difficult because as you know, as you hand over projects, sometimes things get uh, fall by the wayside. The kind of connections that you build with certain people can't necessarily be replicated across the board. And so I came into a situation where I had a project that needed to be accomplished, but I had limitations because I had never worked with this stakeholder before, and he didn't really trust me at first. He was very skeptical. And so I had to really think about how to build rapport actively, apart from just being friendly and empathetic. And so when I came into this situation, I had to do a little bit of a diagnosis of where this person was at within the project, where their expectations were. So that took organization. So what I did is I made sure that I would plan an initial meeting. I was able to focus on listening to how this person perceived the project, where they felt like it had been, where they had felt like maybe it had not been accomplished up to their standards, and to really pay close attention to where how we were going to get there, excuse me, how we were going to be able to accomplish that given task together. It all really hinged on rapport. And so what I did is I was able to take concrete steps, starting with that initial meeting, focusing on listening and understanding how my client interpreted the problem surrounding this project. We both had the same objective, but I needed to understand how they perceived it. I needed to understand the challenges that they were noticing and then how well they understood the problems. And so it all started with an initial meeting and listening. After that, I was able to take concrete steps in preparing. And so being able to organize and prepare the next steps that we would need to move forward. I found opportunities within there to show my client that I was able to competently tackle the problem, organize it for them, and present how I perceive the problem, and to be able to elicit feedback so that we could find ourselves together in a happy median. So we both understood the problem together. And so by demonstrating competence there, by being able to provide concrete steps, and then accomplishing the tasks that I had laid out for the client in a timely manner, I was able to demonstrate competence. I was able to demonstrate good communication. And then I think that really helped us to build rapport. It also didn't hurt that we had a similar background. And so I found opportunities as we were accomplishing tasks to try to emphasize that human connection. And we both found out that we had a military background. it seemed to be able to foster some of that trust that we talked about. And so, as we went through the steps of solving these problems together and communicating, I found that it all started to come together as in enhancing our rapport together. And so, this really, I think that the key takeaway here, though, is that it's not good just to wing things. When it comes to building rapport, there should be a very deliberate approach. It's always good to be able to be empathetic. It's always good to be able to forge trust with someone through a good, strong personal connection. But we really need to take the next step, and that is by being more decisive. And so this kind of takes us into a conversation about how rapport really should become a habit. It is a skill, but it should become habitual. Just like if you're playing a sport and you start to develop muscle memory, you don't just develop that on its own. You have to take deliberate steps to be able to perfect whether it's your baseball swing, whether it's your golf swing, anything like that. Rapport is really the same way. And so I think I know that that's something that we really value here in taking a very decisive approach to building rapport.
Absolutely, Mark. I want to just really emphasize something you said there because on its face, rapport is seems like an odd topic at a certain level. You know, it's like, well, you can either create rapport or not, right? But what is more important in my mind than developing the human connection to actually get things done, right? If there isn't, like, one of my friends once said to me that progress moves at the speed of trust. And I could argue that rapport is a really important aspect of trust, right? And there are certain things that take sincere intention to continue to build that trust and rapport. And so we we've named it here the life cycle of rapport, and there are three high level components. And I think a lot of folks listening will understand these areas right away. So first is listening. Next is clarify. And when I say clarify, that is clarifying what you've heard, right? Because when you're listening, you just want to listen and really understand what someone's perspective is. The la- and then the next piece is clarify. And we're going to get into this in another episode here, but we tend to use this idea of situation, complication, question, and answer, where we're really trying to understand the objective situation of a problem, the critical challenges of a problem that no one would disagree with, that has no subjectivity to it whatsoever. And then what are the questions to understand, like, what is the critical question? Then what are some of the sub questions to that? And then we have this idea of, right, all right, so what is the solution framework to something? Whenever you look at a problem, there's a couple of different components to consider. Whether it's a strategy or an implementation, you have to understand what are all the components to solve that given problem. That way, in any discussion, you really can cite the different areas and make sure everyone is being heard in this exchange. And I also want to mention this applies to not just rapport with an individual, it applies to rapport with a team, etc. And then the last thing here is around getting things done. And Mark, if you could share a little bit about getting things done, I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely. So getting things done, it just sounds very basic, but like most things, it all comes down to these foundational components. Basic is not bad. Basic is good. And so the basics, mastering those basics of getting things done is crucial here. It's very important that we take clear notes and that we have very clear action items articulated. This is very important to keep things simple, to be able to accomplish actual goals. And then we also need to be able to communicate throughout the life cycle of this process. So, not only that initial meeting where we communicate our expectations, where we understand the problem, do a lot of listening, but we need to be communicating the status of things as we move forward. So, when we accomplish tasks, to keep things together, we need to be relaying these these developments to the different stakeholders within the situation. And then also being very clear about what our next steps are and the issues, maybe, or the risks as we go about this. This is something very important. I don't think that we should ever go into a meeting and not always have articulated in some way what the next steps will be after such a meeting. This is all just part of getting things done. And then finally, very important, it's important that we are creating and building and delivering some kind of work product. It might be just a result, but it could be like a deliverable. These are very important. And every kind of task that we take will have some kind of product at the end of it. So it's always important to keep that in mind as we go through getting things done, to always keep in mind, what is that finished result? What is that deliverable? And working towards that as we move forward. And then finally, the last part of getting things done is really always eliciting that feedback, getting that feedback, and then rinsing and repeating, keeping the cycle going. If we can do this, and we don't have to make it overly complicated, but if we can really master these basics of getting things done, we will build much better rapport with everybody involved with solving a problem or accomplishing something.
Thanks, Mark. My favorite component of this is the getting things done piece, because I think nothing builds trust like forward momentum. And when you're having forward momentum, and especially forward momentum in the right direction, because that actually means you heard them, you heard your colleagues correctly, you heard your client correctly, on how to actually move something forward. So we're going to close up here, and I just want to reemphasize this idea. Really brings about trust within an organization, which not only helps get something done, hopefully something big and interesting done, but it also creates long-term capabilities for an organization. And for us here at Karma, that has been a real crucial part of our work, is that we really want our client success. And so we looked at this aspect of rapport, and we broke it up between these ideas of listen, clarify, and getting things done. And we really hope that that can support folks who listen to this episode in progressing the work in their teams. Thanks again, and we look forward to speaking again soon.